Feeling trapped in a cycle of exhaustion, pain, and despair after long COVID? Depression might be the silent companion you never expected. Don't lose hope. In this video, we're going to shine a light on this often misunderstood aspect of long COVID and show you how to break free. Hello, and welcome to this growing community of people who are ready to bust through their anxiety and depression and other weird mystery symptoms. I'm Carrie Bailey, your functional nutritionist. I work with people with anxiety, depression, and other weird mystery symptoms. And together, we use food as medicine. COVID might have triggered your depression. You may have struggled with depression before COVID and it got worse after long COVID. Either way, there's hope. You can heal depression with food and other lifestyle factors. Stay to the end and you'll learn how. Let's first talk about this depression because it's really elusive to a lot of different people. Defining it is really challenging. So how would you describe depression for yourself? There's still a bit of mystery behind depression. Even clinical depression is hard to describe. It's beyond now and then sadness. And there's different levels for different people at different times. Obviously, the worst is when you're feeling suicidal. If you were to ask 10 different people what it feels like to have depression, you would likely get 10 different answers. If you were to come to me complaining of depression, I want to know all about it. When did it start? Does it fluctuate? Is it consistent? What triggered it? What was going on in your life when your depression started? If you were going to explain it to a 5-year-old, what would you say? How would you describe it? For me, depression feels like a disconnection from my soul. It feels like a contraction, a heaviness, rather than an expansion of my heart and in my body. My depression felt like a deep loneliness. I couldn't reach out during those times. People always say, well, why didn't you reach out for help? But I couldn't. I couldn't. I felt disconnected from myself, as well as feeling disconnected from others. Thoughts of self-harm came over me many, many times. The thing I always knew was that tomorrow would be better. Every time I would be in that deep, dark place of sadness and hopelessness and numbness, that I knew that it would be better tomorrow. And that's what kept me going, is because I'd done it enough times. I've had the ups and downs enough. And I saw, okay, this feels really bad right now, but I know it's going to feel better tomorrow. The first time I went to therapy, I was about 17 and I wanted to die. I don't think my mom knew that I wanted to die, but she sent me to the therapist. And unfortunately, it wasn't a very good experience with a therapist. She just listened to me. She didn't validate me. She didn't say I was okay. She just sat and listened to me. And so I just spoke to another person who wasn't responding to me and listening to me. And it was probably more damaging than it was helpful. And in the end, she never gave me a diagnosis of depression. She told my mom that I was having trouble transitioning from childhood to adulthood. But that's not what it felt like to me. But I didn't need a diagnosis. I know how it felt in my body and I know how it felt to me. And I just sought to continually look for answers. When I was really young, I would write in my journal. I would write these horrible, deep, sad feelings that I was feeling. And I was mortified or terrified if anyone were to ever open my journal, right? Back then they were diaries, right, with locks on them. And that made me feel secure somehow. Even I hated rereading those postings in my journal. It just brought up the deep despair that I was feeling. Back then, there was no one in my life that I felt that I could open up to. I felt like I could go to, whether that was my own guilt and shame or whether that was just what the experience was in my life. I felt like there was never one safe person who would listen to me and that I could open up to safely with an open heart. There's a lot of factors that lead to depression. So let's talk about some of those. There's traumatic loss. You might have the loss of a loved one, the loss of a marriage, of a child, you might have a house burned down. You might lose a best friend. So many events can trigger depression. Any feelings that fill you with immense pain might be considered depression. And these might vary from one person to the next, depending on how sensitive you are. But if you are left with hopelessness, helplessness, and despair, that's depression. Even the death of a loved one can vary in the depression because it can vary depending on how that person died, whether they had a long, drawn-out death, whether it was shocking and instantaneous and you didn't expect it. This shock you can actually feel in your body. I think that's why sometimes people say that, have that feeling like this feels really surreal, like it doesn't feel real. One time I remember that shocking feeling is when I came out to my car and found the window was smashed. I felt violated and I felt just this immense shock in my body. It was a really different feeling than any other kind of depression or despair. Depression can come at the end of a series of a lot of events. There might even be a delay, right? When someone dies, it might be numb for a while and it might take time for that depression to set in. It might be once some of that stress and some of those other things lift, that depression sets in. It's almost like if you are numb or shocked, and then finally when those feelings of numbness and shock wear off, depression comes in. Some other ways to describe depression are numbness and pessimism. So if you know somebody super pessimistic, you might wonder, is that their nature or are they depressed? Now, today's day and age, we have so much stress, and traumatic stress, a long drawn out stress. Stress can definitely be a trigger for depression. So stress that is severe or long term can cause depression. This may even feel like burnout. Like you've been stressed for so long and you just hit the wall and you just can't take it anymore. And then you just hang. So burnout and despair feel a lot really similar. I remember after like the second year of COVID, they were talking about that feeling of people being burnt out, right? Trying to be at home, take care of the kids and work all at the same time, and trapped in your house and doing things that because you couldn't get the help because we were all in isolation. The other thing that can really be problematic is if you do confide in a friend and share your feelings and share how you're feelings, and your feelings are not validated, they are invalidated, or you are gaslit or something like that, those can be traumatic. And as a person with complex and chronic illness, if you've gone from doctor to doctor, and each doctor, if they also gaslight you or invalidate it, you say, no, kid, this is in your head, here's have an antidepressant, that could lead to further depression. These interactions that don't feel good are triggering the fight or flight response. This releases adrenaline and cortisol, which is very acidic to the body. And this happens over and over and over again. You're going to get burnt out. You're going to burn out your cortisol, which helps dampen inflammation. And if on top of that, your liver's not working well to get rid of that adrenaline and that excess cortisol, that could be a problem. So this recurring damage of adrenaline can lead to depression. And the way that happens is that this excess adrenaline in your body, because it is acidic, it actually breaks down your neurotransmitters. And in your neurotransmitter, serotonin is one of the neurotransmitters that helps you make sleep. So if it's breaking down serotonin and serotonin can't go on to make melatonin, this is what can lead to sleep problems. You might have problems falling asleep, staying asleep, or you might just fall into sleep and not be able to do anything else. Talk therapy would definitely be helpful in these scenarios when you've got traumatic loss and you've got traumatic stress. But what about when these depression comes about from more of a physiological response in the body? We talked a little bit about adrenal fatigue. I did a previous video called Is Adrenal Fatigue Causing Your Depression?, where I talked more about the adrenaline and how its physiological impact on your body. So I'll put a link to that if you want to check that out more in the description below. You could have an underlying viral or bacterial infection. If you didn't have depression and then you got COVID, the viral COVID could actually cause you to be depressed. You could have also had a low grade, under the radar kind of viral or bacterial infection in your body before you got COVID. This could be Epstein-Barr, Lyme, or other things that led to an autoimmune disease. These pathogens inflame the body and they inflame the brain, and that leads to depression. I've talked about these pathogens in a previous video called 3 Surprising Causes of Anxiety and Depression, so I'll put a link to that below. Another factor that can lead to depression is electrolyte deficiency. In order to maintain your health and your electrical system, that's your nervous system, you need to keep your electrolyte levels in good balance, especially in your brain, because your brain is command central for your nervous system. It's also important to know that the more heavy metals that you have in your body and in your brain, the more electrolytes you need to offset those or to balance them out. If there aren't enough electrolytes in the brain, you understand that the signaling might get interrupted. It's similar to a car battery. So in a car battery, there's a little bit of electrolyte solution. And when that solution goes far enough, the battery dies. So the same concept works in your body. This disruption in electrolyte balance can lead to depression. Well, I talked a lot about hydration and electrolytes in a previous video called Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Solutions. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Let's get into, there's a few different environmental factors that can lead to depression. Let's jump into those. Imagine your life is perfect. You have the perfect job, you have the perfect family, the perfect house. Everything in your life is going spectacularly. If anybody looking from the outside say your life is perfect, what's wrong? Why do you feel depressed? Definitely consider environmental factors, because that could be at play. Those environmental factors could be heavy metals, it could be mold, it could be anything. And the trick with toxins is that they're invisible or almost invisible. Mold grows behind walls. Toxins can be almost anywhere that you're exposed to, and you can't smell them, you can't see them. The trick with toxins is they're almost always invisible. And sometimes there's a smell, but sometimes there's not. I believe this heavy metals was an issue for Tony Robbins. In Tony Robbins' case, I believe he was plant-based, and then he started eating more fish, trying to get more protein in his diet, more fish. And so he started eating more tuna and more swordfish. Well, those are very high in mercury. And so eventually he got mercury poison. And mercury can lead to depression, among other health issues. And I believe that heavy metals were an factor in my depression as well, because I would say when I was 9 years old, I was probably starting to get depressed, that I remember. Those are my first memories of it. And that's about the time I started getting my amalgam fillings in as well. If on top of the heavy metals, you're creating an acidic environment inside your body by eating processed foods, eggs, alcohol, vinegars, things like that, things that are very acidic. This allows the combination of those heavy metals and the acidic environment to settle those heavy metals you're exposed to on a day-to-day basis, to settle into your brain, into some really important glands that can regulate a lot of your body. These include your thalamus, your pituitary, your pineal, and your hypothalamus. Your thalamus plays a role in sleep, wakefulness, learning, consciousness, and memory. Your pineal gland controls your melatonin and sleep cycles, as well as your intuition. And your pituitary gland is a pea-sized gland that regulates your hormones and your moods. You've probably heard of the HPA axis, which is the pituitary hypothyroid adrenal axis, or the HPT axis, which is regulating with your thyroid. And in fact, your thyroid hormone, TSH, is actually released by your pituitary gland. They measure it in your blood, but it's released by your pituitary gland. Hypothalamus controls your body temperature, heart rate, mood, and hunger. If you're struggling with excess hunger, not enough hunger, could be your hypothalamus. And if you're struggling with body temperature issues, maybe you've got Raynaud's or you're always cold. I know I was always cold as a kid, and growing up in Colorado, I was freezing. Every time I would take my body temperature, it was always 97 degrees. It was never 98.4. The heavy metals interfere with the functioning of these glands. So that's why it's important to figure out from your signs and symptoms, could these glands be impacted by heavy metals? So there's some other toxins that can cause damage to your neurons, your nerve cells, and your neurotransmitters, and they can disrupt your body's function. Things like pesticides. So pesticides are in our food if we don't eat organic food, because I think there is still a little bit to some degree in our organic food. I wish it wasn't the case, but unless you're growing them in your own garden, it's kind of hard to ensure that they are perfectly pesticide free. If you have any kind of service that sprays for bugs or sprays for weeds in your yard, that can be an issue. Or if you frequently go golfing or on grassy grounds where they might spray pesticides, it could be an issue as well. Another toxin can lead to depression is formaldehyde. Formaldehyde can be in processed foods. I know that sounds gross. That's what they preserved frogs in biology class in middle school. Formaldehyde can also be in cabinets and furniture and new cars and new houses. So anytime you have those VOC smells, that could be formaldehyde. I like to assess if anybody's had major changes in their life. If they've had a new car or a new house, I like to ask questions there to figure out, could they have, if they got a new car at the same time as they got a new house and then they got sick shortly after there, could that be a factor of their getting sick? Solvents are another issue. So if you breathe in chemicals, let's say you have carpeting in your house and you regularly have those carpeting cleaned professionally, they use a lot of chemicals and solvents that you can breathe in, ingest, and those can lead to getting in your body and not getting out. Also, if you have somebody else cleaning your house, what are your cleaning products? If you clean your own house, what are in your cleaning products? What solvents are in those? Is it vinegar? Is it baking soda? Or is it bleach and Pine-Sol? If you drive a gas-driven car and you're frequently getting gas, are you standing outside at the pump, holding the pump and inhaling those fumes? Are you putting the pump in and getting back in your car and closing the door and windows to make sure that you're not inhaling those gas fumes? If you spill gasoline on your hand or your foot, are you cleaning that off right away? There's some food additives, things that make our food yummy and delicious, and processed foods makes it addictive, like MSG, which can be in canned foods, fast foods, and processed foods. Another food additive people don't think about too much. They want to think, oh, it's so good to chew sugarless gum, but most sugarless gum has something called aspartame in it. And this aspartame is also in diet sodas. It can be in any kind of, diabetes candy or something like that. Anytime somebody says sugar-free, I want to know what's giving it the sweetness. If it's aspartame, that's really toxic on your brain, and you want to make sure that you eliminate that from your diet as much as possible. Sulfites are preservatives in jellies, jams, dried fruit, and vinegar. If you're having a lot of sulfites or sulfates, those can be problematic and leading to depression. If you're loving this video, give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing so that you can see more of my videos in your feed every week. And share my video with someone that you know is struggling with long COVID or depression. All right, let's jump into the ways of healing depression. There's a lot of benefit that you can provide by adding in specific foods, taking out certain foods, other lifestyle factors as well. Let's jump into those. So a great place to start is my anxiety and depression recovery guide. It's this beautiful guide that I've created that gives you tips, tricks, and recipes, everything you need to get started on this journey. And it really gets into what foods to pull out and what foods to put in. Let's get into the specific fruits, vegetables, leafy greens, herbs, supplements that can help your brain in numerous ways. These whole fruits and vegetables and herbs, they can remove or detox heavy metals from your brain. If you want to know a great smoothie for this, check out my brain fog video where I give you a detox smoothie that's amazing. I'll share a link with you in the description below. Eating this way, eating a whole foods, fruits and vegetables ways also replenishes your electrolytes. The best ways to bring in those leafy greens, bring in celery juice, cucumber juice. These are the things that are going to rebuild your electrolytes in your body. These foods also heal the damage caused to the brain tissues. They kill viruses. You'll starve the viruses by taking out the foods that are problematic, like gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, etc. And bringing in these foods is the best way to address nutritional deficiencies. If you're eating a whole foods diet, eating your fruits and vegetables, you're less likely to have nutrient deficiencies. Let's jump into some of my favorite foods for healing depression. Spinach is on my shopping list every week. Sometimes I get 1 bag, sometimes I get 2 bags. But spinach is great because I can add it to soups, to smoothies. I can saute it. I can add it to a curry. Like, there's just so many ways to throw some leafy greens into your meal. Berries are amazing. And they're in California, they're around in season most of the time. But when they're in season, they're even better. So blackberries, strawberries, cranberries, cherries. These are all great, and you can easily put them into a dessert, into a smoothie, you make a big, huge bowl of them just for your breakfast. And the last food is coconut, specifically coconut water. Coconut water is the best natural electrolyte out there, hands down. Throw away your Gatorade, get some coconut water. Make sure that your coconut water is not pink. Pink is actually oxidized, even though the pink brand will tell you it's okay to drink it pink. Pink means it's oxidized. Also want to read, if you get a shelf-stable version of coconut water, you want to make sure that there's no citric acid or added sugar, or added salt, or added anything. You want it to be pure coconut water. Some other forms of coconut that I like to bring in are coconut yogurt and coconut milk. Coconut milk easily added to a smoothie or to curry. There's a lot of great ways to bring it in. You can make coconut ice cream. The other thing that can definitely shift the dial for depression is exercise. Can't be too much, because remember, if you exercise in excess, that's going to lead to adrenal stuff and too much cortisol in your body, and that's going to burn you out. But it's got to be the Goldilocks. If you are a person who's struggling so much they can't get off the couch, then at least as much as possible, practice lifting yourself off the couch. Find your limit. Maybe that's small, but just at least try to do that. Make as much movement as possible. If you are not struggling with chronic fatigue and you can take a walk around the block, get outside in the sunshine, at a minimum, do that, right? Whatever kind of exercise makes you feel good. Maybe it's weights, maybe it's walking, maybe it's hiking. getting out in nature, which is a great segue to my next recommendation, which is getting out in nature every day. If I don't go outside every day, I don't feel good. I need to get out in the sun. I need to touch the grass and the trees, and I just need to breathe. I need to see the colors and the greens and things like that. So getting outside in nature is huge for depression. And lastly, supplements. I've talked about these in detail in a lot of other videos, but B vitamins, just a general B complex, is hands down the best thing that you can bring in. Well, maybe the second best. The first is probably B12. In blood work, it might show that you're high in B12, but it really doesn't mean that you don't need it. Your nervous system uses a lot of B12. We are so stressed in our environment that we just can't, nobody can get. If you've got signs and symptoms and you're here watching this video because you're struggling with your health, then you need B12 in your life, period. You can get an adenosine methyl form or a hydroxy if you can't tolerate methyls. So definitely bring in some B12, B complex. You probably need more B12 than what's going to be in a B complex. And I always like a sublingual form. But again, I've talked about that in all the other videos that I'll share links in the description below. All right, let's wrap this up with a summary, shall we? So I talked about how depression feels very different to different people at different times. In addition to traumatic stress and traumatic loss, there can be physiological reasons why you're depressed. These include adrenal dysfunction, bacterial and viral infections, environmental toxins like heavy metals and pesticides, and electrolyte deficiency. Also, you want to avoid heavy metals and toxins in your environment to detoxify those toxins in your body with whole foods, leafy greens, fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices. We talked about my top 3 favorite foods for depression, which is coconut, spinach, and berries. And we also talked about a couple lifestyle factors, like exercise is huge for helping you get over depression, and getting outside in the sunshine, in the nature. Those are huge for helping your mental health. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.